Welcome to this Ideas Exchange as part of Basildon Creative Tech Fest. We are provocatively looking at the question, will robots replace Basildon's workforce? I think the answer is probably no, but also the answer is probably a little bit more nuanced than that. And that's, I think, what we're going to explore. My name's Richard, and I run an organisation called Always Possible, and we are strategic partners with Basildon Borough Council in developing and designing the Basildon Tech Fest over the last couple of years. It's been a real privilege and honour of ours to collaborate with so many different organisations at bringing together this annual celebration of tech and creativity, which is really having a conversation with the town of Basildon, also the kind of wider South Essex community. But as we'll hear today, these are national and international conversations, really looking at the future of technology and skills, the workforce, and the sort of decisions that businesses are having to make, and the changing opportunity for young people as they're sort of planning and plotting their careers, making that transition from education to work, and trying to navigate the 21st century. Towns like Basildon are particularly interesting because very much a 20th century town built post-war around a number of factories. So the sort of industrial lens through which a town has grown is also a big part of how it needs to adapt. And so we're so delighted to have some of the big employers of the region supporting the festival and helping us shape these conversations. So you'll have to forgive me a little bit. You can hear my voice is slightly croaky. I am battling a cold, and so apologies if I do have to mute and sneeze. But we've got a veritable panel of speakers and guests today who hopefully will do more talking than me. And we're going to explore in an informal and curious way this conversation about robots, automation, AI, and the kind of workforce. So before I introduce my first guest, Chris Middleton, who I'm going to be chatting to through a Q&A for about 20 minutes or so, talking about his work, his findings, and his forthcoming book. And then I will bring in a number of other very special guests who will join a wider conversation, bring their expertise and perspective. But also, if you are joining us live, you are very welcome to put questions forward and join the chat and be part of the conversation. But we are recording this, and this will be disseminated as a resource for businesses, schools, colleges, universities as well, that want to get some insights from the conversation that we're having today. So we hope there's a long-lasting sort of footprint of this Ideas Exchange today. So as I've said, this is part of Basildon's Creative Tech Fest. This is a 16-day festival. We've had over 30 events this year. We're now coming to the end of the festival, but we have had so many glorious hands-on and interactive explorations of AI and intelligent data, of sustainability and green tech, of immersive creativity, and of the theme we're looking at today, robotics and automation. We've had events for families, for schools, for students. We've had events for businesses, big business, small business. We've taken over tractor factories. We've done battery building competitions. We've had an immersive digital arts festival within the festival. It's been a really extraordinary couple of weeks. So thank you to everybody that's been a part of that. And I would like to take a moment to talk a little bit about our sponsor for this event, South Essex College Group. So I'm going to play a little video, which I hope isn't too loud. It's just some music, and then I'm going to talk over the video just to highlight a few of the courses and the kind of the range of opportunities that South Essex College are providing. Hopefully people can see and hear that. So the South Essex College Group offers a range of creative and digital courses at its state-of-the-art campus in Basildon Town Centre. Creative courses include animation, concept art, which equips students with the skills to develop 2D characters, 3D worlds and visual effects using industry standard software such as Adobe Animate and Toon Boom Harmony. By the course end, students produce a professional portfolio and a demo reel for careers in film, TV, video and advertising. The Games Development and Design course prepares students for the booming games industry. Expert tutors share their industry knowledge, guiding students through game engine mastery, visual design and project collaboration. The course is not just about technical skills, but also teamwork, critical thinking and problem solving. The college also offers IT, T-level digital courses, digital production and design and development, which focus on analysing problems and designing, implementing and testing software. Students use tools such as Raspberry Pi and modern web frameworks such as React, Node.js and Angular, as well as Python and Visual Studio. Their digital business services examine how digital systems benefit businesses using Microsoft Office, Power BI and Visio to develop both technical and business skills. And their digital support services teaches essential aspects of data, digital systems, security testing, networking, using resources including Cisco Packet Tracer, Microsoft Project Video, VirtualBox and network cabling. All of these courses include an industry placement of at least 315 hours, ensuring the development of practical skills, and in addition, the higher technical qualifications that comprise the HTQ Digital Tech, Cybersecurity and the HTQ Digital Tech Data Analytics diplomas. Both these programs are equivalent to a second year of university degree and offer specializations in areas such as cybersecurity, networking, applied cryptography, forensics, emerging technologies, Internet of Things, data mining, visualization, stats, predictive modeling and data management. We're really delighted to be working with the college so closely, and they have been a proud sponsor of Basildon Creative Tech Fest 2025. So if you do want to follow up with the college, any conversations, whether you're a business or whether you are a prospective student, please do get in touch with them. We'll share links if anyone wants to follow that up. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm now going to introduce the first of our special guests. You can see from my presentation that I will be joined by four very special guests today. But we're going to start with a conversation between me and Chris Middleton. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see me and Chris. Let's see, there we go. Hello, Chris. Good afternoon.
Hello, Richard. Thanks for the opportunity today. Really appreciate it. So.
Oh, absolute pleasure. My pleasure. So Chris, I've known Chris for a number of years as a friend and a collaborator. Chris is a journalist and author specializing in technology, robotics, AI, and the Internet of Things. Chris has written extensively for leading tech publications and hosted a number of conferences on these subjects. His upcoming book, which I think we're going to talk about, The Robot Century, is going to be released later this year, exploring the evolution and impact of robots and AI from technical, cultural, and policy perspectives. Chris is known for his involvement with humanoid robots, the infamous Stanley Cubit, who I have had the pleasure of meeting, his own pet robot, who's appeared in award-winning productions such as BBC Radio 4 dramatisation of Isaac Asimov's I, Robot stories, and been on the news and all sorts of other TV programmes. And Chris's work also includes an expert mission to the US on behalf of Innovate UK, where he produced policy reports on robotics and AI in extreme environments. Chris has been across TV, radio, on many occasions, talking about the impact of AI on society, with other wide-ranging expertise on areas such as digital finance, government ICT policy, and Industry 4.0 technologies. I could keep going on because your CV is so extensive, Chris, but it's probably better we talk through it rather than me talking at you. How are you this afternoon?
I'm good. It's a wild day on Brighton seafront. So if you hear sort of thunder and rain lashing the windows, that's because there is thunder and rain lashing the windows. So, and the sea is sort of right outside my window. I don't mean that there's a tidal wave heading towards us. But,
we're not peak tsunami. We don't have to worry that you're going to be washed away. Yeah. So I gave a very kind of whistle stop headline of your career. Yeah, where did this intense interest in technology and the application of technology, not just as a just as a kind of business tool or a tool for us to hold in our pockets, but the wider implications that it has on society and economics. Where did you find that there was a very rich seam for your writing and research there?
That's a very good question. I suppose my interest in technology broadly started when I was a kid because I was a child of that sort of interstitial generation, if you like, that came between the boomers and sort of generation X. And that's the sort of the Apollo generation. So I was born into a world where people were walking on the moon and there were communication satellites and supersonic transport and all this sort of stuff. And it was very exciting. And so as a little boy, I believed I'd be sort of living in the future, in the sense of living in the world that I could see on TV while I was growing up. But when I actually joined the world of work, which coincided with, personal computers, Apple Macs, all of that stuff in the early days of the World Wide Web, I came to realize very quickly, as I fell into technology publishing in the 90s, that there are an awful lot of questions that naturally sort of sprang to mind. A lot of futurists in those days, futurologists, people like Nick Negroponte and people like that were talking about everything's going to be digital, every business, everything will become a service. If you buy a car, it won't be about the car, it'll be about the services attached to it. And, high streets will become irrelevant, all of this kind of stuff. And we've seen some of those things come to pass, as it were. We have seen technology affect the high street. We have started shopping online. We have started doing all of these types of things, but it hasn't been a simple straight line to the future in which everything is new. We've ended up in this very complex reality where people have choices. And so there's a lot to write about. And there's particularly a lot to write about nowadays because there's not many people asking questions about these things. There's an awful lot of people providing answers. And in the social media age, in particular, you can get CEOs of companies like OpenAI, people like Elon Musk, Sam Altman and so on, making these incredibly bold pronouncements about AI and about robotics and about the future. And there's very little in the way of critical thinking attached to that stuff because they've got millions of followers. So anything they say is retweeted, it's repeated, people buy into it, people want to be close to these people. And really what we need today is critical thinkers. And I would describe myself as a critical thinker. And there's a lot to write about if you are a critical thinker these days. That's not the same as being a pessimist. I'm certainly not a pessimist, but I'm not an evangelist. And I think that's important. It's important to look at things realistically and to be a critical thinker.
Mm.
And as you know, Richard, from our previous conversations, and particularly in terms of your skills programs that you've run over the years, critical thinking is a skill that's disappearing in many cases. It's not taught in schools. People don't question things enough. And there's nothing wrong with questioning things, and in these days where social media is so powerful, we live in a sort of marketing communications world where people buy technologies primarily because of hype, but they don't necessarily buy technology because there's a specific business need for it. They buy the technology first and wonder what to do with it after,
I think
they buy
that's
the hammer and look for the nail, as I said once. Yeah.
buy the hammer and look for the nail. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the tail often wags the dog in these situations, because we are seduced by it, aren't we? There's
Mhm.
a susceptibility about the new and the shiny, just the same
Yeah.
way that captivated you when you were young.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
it's incredibly seductive.
Mm.
Um, but I'll come back to that idea around critical thinking and the sort of analysis
Yeah.
that is or isn't being done in businesses, particularly, but also, as you say, from young people coming through education and learning those skills or not. I think that's really interesting. We will come back to that. But
Yeah.
just sticking with kind of you and your interest first, you talk a lot about digital. We talk digital and what is it? The word digital is kind of been corrupted really, but we think of it now as quite ethereal, liminal. The internet is kind of everything everywhere all at once. Digital is uh, y- uh, the kind of the space between things where things are talking to each other through coding and programming and sensors.
Mm,
But what's always fascinated me about your writing and your work is your very particular interest in physical machines that have a sort of a role to play. And we'll debate the word intelligence. It's a complicated word, but
mm,
but your collection of humanoid robots, your kind of fascination with the sort of 60s space age culture, but how that's also got a role to play in modern, actual modern life.
mm.
Um, what is it about the the actual tangible robot that has been of interest to you? And also kind of when we talk about a robot, what is a robot?
That's a very good question. I'll come back to that in a moment. To answer your first question first, my fascination came really from the, robots, if you like, when I was growing up, were a kind of an emissary of the future. That they were a representation of what the future, an embodiment, if you like, of what the future might look like to somebody who was growing up in the space age. And in fact, robots have always been that, because most of our ideas about robots and robotics and AI come originally from science fiction, and they come originally from the stories that people tell about machines and about our relationship with the world. Um, the word robot was only coined in 1920, 1921, in a play called Rossum's Universal Robots by a Czech playwright called Karel Čapek. And he came up with this idea of the robot, based on the Czech word or the Slavic word robotar, which basically meant a slave. It meant bonded labor. And so, really, when he was writing about these things in his play Rossum's Universal Robots, he was writing about the world of mechanization and mass production and the modernist world, the machine age that was starting in the 1920s when he came up with the idea. And he came up with this really as a device to talk about labor and to talk about labor rights and about human rights in a labor machine age context. So it was a fictional idea, but over the years it's become a real idea. But the very first robot, in terms of the use of the word, was in a fiction about the industrial age. And the robots in that play were artificial beings rather than machines created to work for us. And in that very first story about the robot world, the robots rise up and overthrow human beings. So that idea that robots are a threat to mankind was there from day one in terms of the stories that
Mm.
we tell about robots, if you like.
Uh,
It's been there right from, for 100 years, and that's why my book is called The Robot Century.
And I think that's what's absolutely fascinating about this these technology conversations is that so much of our understanding still comes from the storytelling
Yeah.
and the framing and the sort of creative thought experiments as much as it does the science and the engineering,
Mm.
sometimes more so. And you
Mhm.
and you spoke earlier about the sort of the hype that sells at the moment. And it does feel like we are on the real cusp uh, of a next generation of technology that is genuinely game changing and transformational for the human race. Maybe it's not a next generation; it's already here. But in terms of the application of it and the access to it, you know, that's real. But
Mm.
a lot of the storytelling around it, the framing, the sort of FOMO perhaps is not so real, or so real rather, and that people feel that they've got to or should or must have a particular tech product or immerse themselves in something just for the fear of being left behind. So where's the reality there? Where do you think is the sort of on the scale, the genuine people will be left behind if they don't invest in this and take it seriously versus the sort of power of the pitch. And actually people could afford to slow down a little bit, be a little bit more critical, do a bit more analysis, look at the evidence before jumping into any particular thing.
Okay, well, there's a lot there. Firstly, I've seen an awful lot of reports over the past 3 or 4 years on enterprise, big business adoption of artificial intelligence. And I'll explain the link between AI and robots in a moment. But sticking with AI for the moment, as it's very much the technology of the day, pretty much every report I've read so far, and these are big enterprise reports based on thousands of users from big companies, big consultancies, technology companies, and so on. They broadly say the same thing. Firstly, that people are buying the technology because they think they need it, but they secondly don't really know what it's for and what they actually want to do with it. So it's the buying the hammer, they're looking for the nail. They're buying it because their competitors are buying it primarily, and therefore they fear missing out, as you said. A long way down the list is making their organization more intelligent. And that is really surprising. And it's a little bit worrying, because you would think that would be the first thing that people would want from an artificial intelligence, is to help them make better decisions, to look at their own data and query it and get, find hidden patterns in the data, hidden opportunities. You think that would be number one, but it's a long, long way down. It's normally something like 25% of people want that, but something like 80 or 90% want to save money and they want to be more productive. So one thing that worries me, if you look at that picture, is that people are really buying the technology for the wrong reasons. They're buying it because they think it's going to save them money, and perhaps it will. They think it's going to make them more productive. Perhaps it will. That's a debatable point. But a long way down the list is this thing that you would hope AI would do, and that's to help people make better decisions and to help them be more informed. And that's troubling, because you keep finding that finding in every single report that I've seen. I haven't seen a single one that contradicts that. There was also, you were talking about students earlier, and lovely video from the college. There was a report that came out this morning that the Guardian has quoted, and a few other people have, saying that 92% of people at university are now using AI. 92% of students, and about 88% of them are using it in their assessments and in their essays. And there was another report which sort of maps into that. That's not to say, by the way, that that's a criticism of students. It's a very complex picture. To say that 92% of students are using it is not to say that 92% of students are cheating. That's not the case. They're using it to do research, to summarize things, and to help them save time. But there was another report came out recently from Microsoft, interestingly, Microsoft Research, saying that the more people, this came from a study of people who are using AI actively, the more people use this technology, the less they think for themselves. And this has been proven in the results of their tests. People stop thinking for themselves, they stop thinking critically about things, they start trusting the technology very quickly. And the fact that the Guardian was saying, or quoting this report, saying that students are using it to summarize information, I think is interesting and a little bit worrying, because it suggests that students aren't actually reading original texts. They're not reading things in depth, they're reading summaries. And as anyone who has ever read an executive summary of a report and then looked at the actual report, those two things are often very different. Often what a report says in depth over 90 or 100 pages is very different to what a summary will say. You get the headline findings of a summary, you get the PR version, you get the good news for business or whatever. But once you read the report in depth, you often get quite a different, more complex picture. And so if people are using AI just to summarize things, what worries me is that we're getting a very shallow world of information rather than a world of depth. And it's one driven by time and the need to move quickly and to be more productive. It's not driven by the need to help people be more intelligent and to understand things in greater depth.
Yeah,
and I think that's a worry.
that's interesting.
Yeah, and sorry, the link with robots, which I promised to make, is that robots and AI have for a long time been quite different technologies, but increasingly they are merging. And we've seen this with, all these videos of humanoid robots and so on. Once you put an AI in a robot, a robot can then begin to understand the world around it, and an AI can begin to understand the world around it too, because it can move around in the world and interact with things. And so you end up with a world of what they call embodied intelligence. So the word robot may actually fall out of fashion, if you like. We may come to regard them as embodied intelligences, AIs that have physicality, that walk around amongst us, or work in factories or whatever.
Mm.
So that's the link.
And you talk in your book about, if AI, which most people accept as a problematic term,
Mm,
what we usually mean when we talk about generative AI, as large language models.
mm.
You're talking about this kind of embodied intelligence as large behavior models,
Yes, that's right.
in which then that's the kind of secondary dimension. It's actually observing human behavior rather than just processing human text.
Yep.
Um, could you elaborate on that a little bit? And I enjoyed reading a little bit about that in your book. The kind of why real world, this kind of this multi-sensory experience,
Mm.
taking processing into a different level. What are the implications of that? What does embodied intelligence give us that we don't already have?
Well, as I'm sure a lot of people know, chatbots and large language models and AI essentially are looking at a huge amount of human data and allowing us to query it and ask questions of it. And in many cases, as we all know, they hallucinate, they make things up if they don't have the training data. But we tend to credit the AI rather than the human who created the training data. And I think that's a shame. We lose sight very quickly of the human experts whose data was scraped off the web in order to train a large language model. But all that is really is text. An AI today could explain the Renaissance to you, or it could explain the Bauhaus design school in the 1920s in Germany, or it could explain theoretical physics and Einstein's theory of gravity. But really, that's just text. Text doesn't help a robot to understand the world around it, because there's a huge difference between if you stick your finger in a flame and burning yourself, and reading a text describing somebody burning their finger by putting their finger in a flame. The two things are very different. One is an experience of the real world, and you know what happens intuitively as a human being if you do that. But a large language model, for example, doesn't know what a flame is. It doesn't know what burning yourself is. It's just recycling text. It doesn't understand anything about the world. It doesn't understand language. An LLM doesn't understand any of the things it can describe to you, but it can tell you about them, because it's sort of remixing data. What a large behavior model would do is allow a robot, for example, to walk around in an environment and learn to predict what will happen next if it does this. If it picks up this object, if it puts it there, what happens next, And in a way, that's similar to what a large language model does, because that predicts what the next word is going to be, In a robot, it would predict what the next action is going to be, or what the consequences of an action are. So it's the difference between a page of text and walking around in the real world and finding something out for yourself, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference.
And you talk in your book about the Chinese room. Uh,
Yeah, the
uh,
Chinese room problem. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, talk me through that, and talk through the sort of um,
Yeah, and the
viewing
stochastic
of this.
parrots and all of these things. Um, Essentially, one of the challenges with AI today, which we all need to be more aware of, is that because it sounds intelligent, because it uses the language of intelligent people, we come to believe that the AI is in itself in some way intelligent, that it's thinking, it's sentient, perhaps, it's conscious. But really, it's just recycling text. And that doesn't mean it understands any of the things it's saying. It doesn't mean it's conscious. And what the Chinese room thought experiment was about, this was proposed in 1980s by Searle. Essentially, what it says is that in theory, you could put a man in a room with drawers full of information, and somebody could, but somebody who doesn't speak a word of Mandarin or Cantonese, doesn't understand Chinese, is simply an English language speaker, you could give him a question in Cantonese or Mandarin, and as long as he knew which drawer to go to open, and to read an English language instruction that said, if you see this symbol, go to this drawer, open it, write down the symbol you see there, and hand it back to this person. In theory, you could answer questions in Chinese without understanding a word of Chinese. And this was his proposal for explaining why AIs aren't intelligent if that's all they're doing. An AI doesn't have to understand the subject in order to give you an answer. That's the point. So a man who doesn't understand a word of Chinese could, in theory, write a Chinese language answer to a question without understanding the question or what he was writing, simply by following an instruction in English. So that's the so-called Chinese room experiment. It just proves that you can create the illusion of intelligence very quickly, and that people just start trusting AIs because they sound intelligent. That's the point, but it doesn't mean they actually are in the human sense of the word. And that's a risk.
And so obviously the provocation for this session is around robots stealing jobs, and it's
Yeah,
a fond headline for the
yes,
tabloids.
yeah.
But there's a reality to it, and we see that, and you talked about productivity being the main motivator for many businesses to adopt all sorts of forms of automation at the moment, and in a turbulent economy, that makes sense. We can see a job market that has been affected by a reduction in hiring as companies try and get their heads around some of these processing tools. But ultimately, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you think the bigger risk is not necessarily that. It is this idea of kind of laziness or dependability, losing perhaps some of the intellectual rigor, the critical thinking. And the productivity thing will kind of balance itself out. But what we could have is a loss of quality, or a loss of innovation, because we're relying on a simulacra, the machines that pretend, rather than the humans that know. Is that fair?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, it is a worry, and there's evidence to support it. People are reading summaries; they're not reading original texts. They're thinking less critically the more they trust AIs, and so on. These are already identifiable trends, but they make perfect sense. None of this should be a surprise. What is a surprise is that people aren't really thinking enough about it, and they're not thinking of strategies to deal with that. On the jobs front, if you're talking specifically about robots, rather than embodied intelligences, by far the biggest market within robotics is still industrial robots. Something like 500,000 industrial robots are sold every year. But they're only sold really to about 5 countries. China is automating faster than any nation on earth. Something like 300,000, slightly less, industrial robots were bought by China alone last year. And that's the equivalent to the number of service robots, which is sort of everything else, basically, bought in the entire world. The other countries that are buying industrial machines are South Korea, Japan, the United States, and Germany, interestingly. France is automating a lot faster than the UK as well. The UK, in terms of industrial automation, is way down the list, so far down the list, it's something like 24th or 25th in the world. We're investing more in automation than we have been recently. But we have one of the lowest robot densities, to use the technical term, in the developed world. That's the number of industrial machines per 10,000 workers. It's something like 119 robots per 10,000 workers in the UK. And you think, well, that sounds quite impressive, until you realize that the global average is about 160. and in the EU, it's about 190, just under 200. So we're automating very, very slowly in this country. And the spike in automation was in the car industry a couple of years ago. But what's interesting is that if that leads to, if it's true that a robot in equals 10 humans out or 100 humans out in very simple terms, you would think that very highly automated countries would have very high human unemployment, and they don't typically. It's hard to know exactly what unemployment is like in China because the government statistics and the actual statistics may not match. But there isn't much evidence to suggest that millions of Chinese people are out of work that I'm aware of. But certainly in Japan, South Korea, Germany, France, and other highly automated countries, the Nordic countries, are way ahead of the UK as well. Unemployment hasn't suddenly spiked because people have been buying robots. That doesn't really happen. Often what happens is new jobs are created. And this is missed out of a lot of these discussions. Yes, jobs are taken, but new jobs are also created, and new companies are created, and new services are created, and often the jobs that are created are expert level jobs. But also a lot of low quality human jobs are created as well. So that's something we do need to look at. If you just have to go into a Boots or a supermarket and see the people who used to serve on the tills are now sort of hovering around in a non-specific way, helping you use the automated till, and so that's not a high quality job that's being created by automating retail. It's created a low quality job, and that's something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to my final question before we bring in
Yeah. Okay.
others. Is your point about the UK being very low down the kind of world rankings in terms of investment in automation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd heard that and attended a few talks from the College of Robotics. But also fair to say that in the UK it's not a level, that it's not a level playing field across the board. So there are some parts of the UK where actually the investment has been pretty acute, whereas others where
Yeah.
it's almost none. And I guess that would make sense when we look at the sort of manufacturing bases. So in the context of Basildon,
Mm.
I think the stat that most people don't know, and this includes a lot of the people who live and work there, is that it's considered to be a kind of a Thames settlement. Even though it's a couple of miles north of the Thames, it's still sort of part of the estuary corridor.
Yeah.
But it's second only to Canary Wharf in terms of GDP generated as a settlement, which is
Right.
quite extraordinary when you consider all other sort of parts of London and Oxford, and
Maybe. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
all pretty much driven by three global manufacturing plants that pull Basildon's kind of economy up and is responsible for a huge number of the jobs and has been
Mm.
since the 1950s. Um, and so with that, there is quite a lot of investment in automation, probably more so in the town of Basildon than pretty much any other town in the region. So it has it has a different relationship to it. So I think the part of the reason we're really looking at that acutely in this festival is exactly to your point about humans, maybe the jobs not being replaced by robots, but having to work alongside.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in what could we as sort of professionals, aging professionals looking out for the next generation,
Mm.
educators and employers do to kind of equip young people to have the skills to not compete with robots necessarily, but to work alongside them, to get the most out of them, to be synergistic with a kind of a new automated reality.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think what Basildon has been doing is amazing. And the video this you showed earlier was very inspiring, and that's all well and good. I think in general, acquiring critical thinking skills is very important. I think soft human skills are very important in a very highly automated world. I remember somebody from Oxford University, from the Future of Humanity Institute, which amusingly doesn't exist anymore, saying a few years ago that if you could describe what you can do for a living, your job will be automated. And I thought that was an interesting insight. He interestingly didn't see his own institute being shut a few years later, but that's neither here nor there. But it's that thing about if your job can be broken down into very simple, repeatable steps, then it's very susceptible to being automated. I think if critical thinking, the ability to be adaptable is incredibly important, but also the ability to be very niche. If you can develop very, very niche skills in a very specific area and a very specific context, that kind of deep expertise in subject areas is very important, and could very easily get lost in a world of generalists. So I think all of those things: be adaptable, be a critical thinker, be a good team worker, be able to think for yourself, have soft human skills, but also, read up in things in depth. In a world of shallowness, go deep.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I'm sure there's been things that Chris has said that will inspire questions or challenge or confirmation. So do, if you're listening live, feel free to put some questions in. We will address them. But I would love to bring now forward my three other expert guests. So do feel free, guys, to put your cameras on and your mics. So I'll introduce all three together, and then I'll come to you one by one to say hello and talk a little bit about your world, and maybe to respond to anything that Chris has said. So we've got Dr. Sharon Sabanda as Head of Computing for the University of Essex Online, oversees all programs offered at both undergraduate and postgraduate level, and has a background, a wide-ranging background, including teaching, managing qualifications in computer science for secondary and higher education institutes for over 20 years. Led the development and launch of undergraduate and postgrad degree programs in digital technology, AI, and data science, and is currently a member of the Association of Computing Machinery, with research interests in effective computing and improving learner outcomes in computer science. So welcome, Dr. Sabanda. We also have Steve Wells, an international speaker, futurist, strategist, and facilitator. He delivers thought-provoking keynotes and strategic foresight sessions, helping clients navigate the future of life, business, and society. With expertise in innovation growth and disruptive change, he explores the impact of AI, robotics, augmented and virtual reality, and the Internet of Things, as well as mindset shifts and leadership needed in an evolving world. He's edited, co-edited, and written many, many books. I've had the pleasure of contributing to some in the past, and including Aftershocks and Opportunities, A Very Human Future, which looks deep at deep insights and the potential of emerging tech. So welcome, Steve. And last but absolutely not leastly, we have Rose Tai, a product and innovation leader with extensive experience in broadcast, communications, technology, and digital platforms across business to business and business to consumer markets. Has led product teams at Sky, Amazon, and Trustpilot, and is very focused on making innovation more accessible and inclusive. Rose is co-chair of Innovate UK's Immersive Tech Network, ED&I Group, and she's a council member of BEMA's Innovation Council. Advocates for greater diversity in emerging tech, and is the co-organizer of Brighton AI, a recently launched, which is an amazing kind of citywide kind of think and do tank around what AI can be in a modern city, and has recently launched a no-code network to help non-technical individuals and small businesses build digital solutions. So I think you'll agree, a really amazing set of guests this afternoon. So I'll come to you first, Sharon. If you want to expand on that introduction, tell me a little bit more about your world in education, and maybe your thoughts around the title provocation of this webinar.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm really pleased to be here. So my world is really in higher education mainly. It does also include what we would call degree apprenticeships, as well as your kind of normal university, where you would probably start at maybe at 18 and you go into that in that manner, or you could possibly come to us and go online. The online world has been great because in the past 2 years, we've seen how, online education has been kind of seen as an equivalent really to going face to face, because previously there was that kind of reputation about that. And the University of Essex Online does really try to emulate what we want to encourage the learners to kind of build that resilience, all of the skills that Chris was mentioning, aspects around soft skills as well. But we certainly have a challenge because the trend, for example, that Chris was mentioning earlier, around the current kind of what we're talking about now, which is not really what AI is about, where we want to have systems that are having real world mental models. That's the challenge for us in online learning that we need to kind of get our heads around. We're looking at content development, and we're looking at how learners use chatbots, and how we can move away from this kind of accusatory manner of approaching the use of new technologies by students and teachers as well, and try and move it towards being forward thinking about that. And with regards to the idea of robotics taking over jobs in Basildon, as you said earlier, it's not necessarily the case that that will happen, but there certainly needs to be some thinking about how things are changing, how jobs are changing, and how we want to, as has been previously mentioned, we want to develop high quality jobs, not just low quality jobs. So how we transition our those who are working and those who are trying to get into this technology world, how we can help them to transition is quite important. And there's things about the nature of a job in the first place that is kind of changing. So for us, employability is not what it meant maybe 30 years ago or 20 years ago. It's what it means post-COVID now, the acceleration of things like remote working and how we can be adaptive and proactive around that as an education institution, as employers. That's what we need to kind of think about. And sometimes opening up the technology to more people is one very easy way of actually achieving that. But we have to think about the implications of that, how that might impact the world if we did that. And the underlying ethics really around systems, AI systems, or real world mental model systems, where they're beginning to really see the world as it is rather than a kind of a subset of text. So there's a lot to grapple with at the moment, but it's a challenge that we're kind of looking forward to getting involved with. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thanks for being with us. And now to Steve. So you travel the world figuratively and physically, trying to get to the kind of the root of these challenges and advising businesses and public sector on what to do next, what's coming around the corner, what the data shows us. So tell us a little bit more about that world, the world of a futurist in this rapidly changing marketplace.
Well, I mean, one of the things that for me has been really interesting is the increased interest in foresight and futures thinking since COVID. But I kind of counter that somewhat by saying that whilst there has been that increasing interest in thinking about the future, the reality is more and more people, because perhaps there's so much change in the world, are tending to focus very much on the here and now. And I think that's dilemma for organizations, for be they public sector or enterprise organizations, to actually work out what it is that we actually spend our time, thinking about. I mean, I argue, for example, that actually there are three timeframes that organizations have to consider in parallel. We need to win the race for the current year. So, so that's really about making sure that, we still have applicability at the end of the year that we thought we were going to have at the beginning of the year. So operational efficiency, those kind of things. Most organizations then take a bit of a step back once a year to look a little bit into the future, perhaps 1, 2, 3 years, where they might do their strategic planning. And in the past, strategic planning has been great. But I think the problem with strategic planning and strategic thinking is that, and I'm going to generalize massively here, it tends to take a stepwise approach to thinking about the future. And it also bases the assumptions we might draw about the future from the existing trends that we see. And this is why the third time frame is equally as important, not that we necessarily spend the same amount of time on it. And that's where we really look further into the future, take ourselves above the horizon so we can look to see at what the longer term changes might be, what longer term changes might be happening, whether they're new economic models, whether they're new social models, whether they're new technologies, whether they're combinations of new technologies, whether they're geopolitical uncertainties in the world, fairly topical at the moment. But we need to think about those three timeframes to be effective, ensuring our resilience as we move into the future. One of the things that I was doing while Chris was speaking that I think encapsulates the way that I like to think about the future and the way that I like to engage people around the world is I was starting to think about four worlds. And in one world, we have a stable geopolitical landscape. You remember when we used to have those? Well, let's imagine that we have one of those again in the future. But that we have a fairly low penetration into the marketplace of some of these emerging technologies. So, a nice, easy transition into a more highly digitized world. But then let's think about a world where we still have that kind of stable geopolitical landscape, but actually we have a high and rapid penetration of some of these technologies because it's driven by desire to increase our profitability, to increase our efficiency. And typically we do that through taking people out of the workforce and replacing them with machines. At the same time, we might have another world where actually we have a highly volatile geopolitical landscape. We also have low technology penetration into the marketplace. What does that kind of world look like? And then finally, we have this fourth world where we have a volatile geopolitical landscape, something like we might be seeing right now. But we have high penetration of some of these emerging technologies into the marketplace. So, what is it that all those four worlds tell us about the potential future? Because if we look 5, 10, 15 years into the future, any one of those four worlds could come into play. In actual fact, I would imagine that components of each of those four worlds are more likely to come into play than one world or the other. And for me, a futurist kind of helps people and organizations think about, so what are the implications of these different worlds? What are the key decisions we might need to take now to ensure that we remain relevant, that we can be adaptable, that we do operate in the right way, that we do change our business model in the right way, that we do adopt the right technologies to do the kind of things that we want to do. So hopefully those kind of few words help you kind of understand a bit about what I do and how I do it.
Thank you. And the curse of prioritization feels harder and harder for many businesses at the moment. As you've set out there, and some have the skills and capabilities to do that, but certainly smaller businesses really struggle to know quite where to put their energy. Thank you very much, Steve. So to bring Rose now, Rose. A product guru, specializing in innovation and how big and growing companies create the products and services of the future. Tell us a little bit about that and where that fits into this conversation.
I mean, it's super interesting. I've been doing product for about 25 years now. So over that time, I've observed lots of different technology trends come in and disrupt. Thinking back to the introduction of the mobile phone, I think that was really interesting because, I was in a consumer-facing business that really had to get to grips with that very quickly, and you saw how it challenged the organization structures. And quite frankly, a lot of organizations today, certainly the ones that evolved pre-internet, have struggled even with those changes, and now we're faced with something that's got such a fundamental impact and so rapidly on different jobs. I mean, first of all, I'd say that like product management is one of the best careers. It's a non-technical route into technology. It's our product folks who decide what features get built in products that millions or billions of people are using. So it's an incredibly influential career, and that's why I'm particularly passionate about it. I think there's two stories going on if you look at it's also an interesting thing, I think, product, because it's sort of an indicator of the business community's investment in innovation, whether they are sort of knuckling down and just trying to sort of stick with core experiences they've got at the moment, whether they're playing it safe or whether they're really sort of reaching out into new markets and new products. So you can tell a lot by what's going on within the product community. I think if we were going to zoom out for a bit and just talk about what corporates, so my experience has been very much sort of commercial, lots of different sizes of organization, but particularly big corporates. What I think you can observe with AI adoption at the moment is that it's incredibly patchy depending on the organization, but a lot of organizations are sort of shoving Gemini out there and teaching people how to prompt and just letting them get on with it. And a lot of organizations will struggle with anything that cuts horizontally across their org structure. So this is sort of to be expected, but they're not really going to see massive productivity benefits by just teaching people prompt engineering. You really need to get into how you're going to leverage these tools. But there is a sort of slightly another story that's emerging. So on the one hand, it seems quite slow in terms of what a lot of larger organizations are doing. But when we start to look at some of the hiring patterns, that tells another interesting story. And this is data that came out at the beginning of this month from Mind the Product, looking at surveys of hiring managers. The story that starts to tell is that only less than 1.5% of the jobs that were being advertised were entry-level positions into this brilliant career. And that's starting to be seen across other job disciplines, I understand, but certainly within the product community, we're starting to see that. And the majority of the hiring is now happening at this mid-range. So it's going to be really hard for new talent to get in. About 65% of the roles that were being advertised were for these mid-level, at the expense of entry-level and leadership levels. So we're not going to see that mentoring, and we're not going to see those early opportunities if we carry on this path. The other thing that the data shows us is that only 16% of the hiring managers were hiring for new product development versus existing products. And that shift is quite substantial because in 2023, it was 32%. So we can see there's this sort of conservatism going on within organizations. And there's lots of reasons for that. But if we just look at what AI is doing and the potential there, on the one hand, there's the potential to smash all these job functions into one. Whether that happens or not, I'm not quite sure, but certainly with no code, we can have folks actually being able to develop their own products and services. So I think the job functions are going to start shifting, or could shift within organizations. But equally, we could see that it really means that anyone can come up with their own products and services, whether they're good ones or not, comes down to that sort of critical thinking and a whole bunch of other skills. But certainly we're starting to see an increase in the number of solo entrepreneurs and founders who are bootstrapping and creating new businesses. So there's lots of different stories going on simultaneously.
Thank you, Rose. Yeah, no, absolutely fascinating. Maybe I'll try and play with the spotlights and get the right people in the right place. That's me failing in my own no-code tech. So a question to picking up on Rose's point there, particularly around the sort of recruitment priorities, and we're seeing that a lot at the moment, in this very, very kind of strange labour market, in which many, particularly in tech, but in other sectors as well, there's this kind of quest for the unicorn, these kind of middle to senior level experience, bypassing the entry level, bypassing the unpolished, not quite full package yet, got to invest in and develop over time. And we're seeing that in corporates, but we're seeing that very, very acutely in small businesses that feel they haven't got the time or the bandwidth to be able to, or even the internal staff to kind of take young people or recent graduates through a process. And we've seen job descriptions that are demanding 10 years of generative AI, experience from entry level jobs. It's like, what? Good luck with that. So I'm interested in from each of your different experience. Sharon as an educator, Chris as a sort of a critic, Steve and Rose as business kind of advisors. What if we were to get real around that and to really think about how to develop new talent and skills, how to support either new entrants into the workplace, or also just as importantly, people later in life switching careers, because we've got a massive skill shortage that we need to be able to get skills into this technology from wherever it can come. Um, what's your advice, if you have any, for businesses in terms of that relationship to skills development? What could they be doing differently? What might they be thinking about? I'm not going to pick on anyone specific to start on that. I'll let you decide and come in and maybe feed off each other. I don't know who wants to start.
If I can broaden this question out, because I think the question of what should enterprise do is one of those that's really hard. Actually, it's really easy to answer, isn't it? What we should be encouraging enterprise to do is to bring people on and train them, because actually that's good for their businesses and it's good for the society we live in. But then if we take a little bit of a step back, then we have to think about what role should the education system be playing? Because I think we would all agree that actually the education system we have at the moment isn't really set up for generating, well qualified, rounded, human skills focused people to come into the jobs market. Now, there's a bizarre thing that happens in education. So when you're right at the beginning of education, you go into a nursery school, a kindergarten, something like that. And you're these 3-4-year-old, really bright things, really looking to explore the world around you. And kids at that age are encouraged to be creative, to focus on, kind of being a good collaborator, to share things, to kind of explore. When kids then go into school, they get taught technical things and get taught how to pass exams. And that, I'm really good at generalizing massively, and I'm going to do it again. And that kind of feeds all the way through from school, into senior school, into college, and dare I say, even into university. So that when students leave education and start work, employers are saying, well, where are all these skills that I want? So, if you go far enough into the future, what we're talking about here is that actually we need something to change in education that prepares students for the world of work, because that's good for them, it's good for employers, it's good for the economy. But I think the question about what should enterprise be doing is really taking every opportunity to bring young people in and provide these opportunities, because great for your own reputation, isn't it? So maybe there's a persuasion job there, as well as perhaps some of the economic benefits that an enterprise can realize from doing that.
Sharon, do you want to come in on that, because you were talking about employability changing over the last 30 and what we mean by it and post-COVID? I wondered if you wanted to expand on that point and then follow up on what Steve had said.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Steve. Degree apprenticeships are kind of like an example of what things could look like in the future when it's done well. The question is really difficult, because we understand that, as we've said, skills that are required now have changed. So we've got issues around people wanting to collaborate. So organizations want you to be more collaborative. People actually find that challenging. There's the aspect of, some people having, particular difficulties around that. Sometimes when someone is perhaps neurodiverse. And so it's kind of trying to bring all of that together to still try and, continue to encourage and engender those skills in people so that they can develop them and that they can be adaptive and flexible. So, things like collaboration, being able to present your work in different ways rather than just presenting it in one form like text is an important part of what the education system would want to do. A closer relationship between education institutions and businesses is obviously another part of that kind of wheel or cog on the wheel that would be really helpful, because when we are looking for placements, the piece earlier from South Essex mentioned that there are work placements that are available. Those are the kind of the ways that those who are learning can actually apply their work in the workplace, and then that can make it come to life and they can understand exactly how they can develop it even further. And so the risk, if it were, is kind of shared between the education institution and the employer. So those are just some of the ways that should really be developed further. But it's fairly challenging at the moment to kind of see, well, who owns the particular approach that we take in the end. But degree apprenticeships, as I say, are one way where it's seemingly positive. I know the government is changing that recently to perhaps look.
Say that they're going to cut the funding, aren't they?
They're going to cut the funding and move away from the postgraduate ones, I think, is where they're looking to kind of reduce, because I think they've been popular for many people who are looking to change career. So, there's something to think about there. Are they losing an opportunity there? Where it's a good way for someone who perhaps has a job that is kind of changing and is being displaced by technology, being able to actually adapt and change their role by actually retraining on a program such as some of the conversion courses out there, which are a degree apprenticeship. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it leads to bigger conversations about who should pay for this upskilling, and there's been a tension between business and government on that, and with the relaxation of apprenticeship funding and the levy, in many ways opening up this kind of vocational pathways in cutting edge technologies. But what it did do was move the number of the number of apprenticeships are now, over 50% are over 25. It's changed the meaning of apprenticeship, which used to be a kind of 16 to 18-year-old, very early stage, learning a career starter. That fundamentally that's not now who are doing the bulk of apprenticeships because of the way it's been funded. So there's always this kind of strange dance. Thank you, Sharon. That's really interesting. So Rose or Chris, would you like to join in on that?
Yeah, I could jump in on that. I think there's a massive win-win, right, for organizations, for commercial organizations. I can't tell you the number of companies that are paying a fortune for decks on how to appeal to Gen Z, and yet the opportunity is there to actually hire them, bring them in, and the same will be true of Gen Alpha. It's the next generation of consumers, quite frankly. I think the other thing is that, looking back over previous tech waves, there's always this skeuomorphic phase where it just copies what the paradigm that everybody knew, going right the way back to sort of cinema. It was like, originally people standing on a stage being filmed. And we did that with the iPhone. All the initial icons looked like notepads and address books. And so you have this skeuomorphic phase until people with fresh ideas think about how that technology can be used. So I'm super excited about how maybe AI natives, or whatever we want to call them, what they're going to do when they completely rethink how we can take the superpowers of these technologies and develop new business models that, quite frankly, organizations really, really struggle to do.
I think to pick up on a couple of things everyone's been saying, I was quite alarmed to hear, that sort of junior level employees are not being sort of brought into organizations. That's something that's worried me for a long time. I was speaking to the CEO of a software company a few months ago, and he was saying he simply doesn't hire junior programmers anymore. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, because the AI can do that. And in my own industry, in the media, broadly speaking, a local paper in Brighton now employs AI-assisted reporters, and it's their job essentially, and that's a national thing, actually, it's a national company. The Brighton paper employs an AI-assisted reporter. Essentially, what the junior reporter's job to do is to make what the AI has done sound more human. And so there you've got a publishing company that's not training a next generation of journalists and writers. It's not training people in how to do their job. It's training people how to support what the AI is doing. And I think that worries me, the idea that we're putting sort of the cart before the horse. You know, I hope employers think more about creating jobs in which AI is supporting a human being, rather than creating very low value jobs in which people's role is essentially to support what the AI is doing. I think as long as, you know, the human is always in the loop and the AI is supporting that, I think that's a good thing. But I do see warning signs of organizations just handing entire tasks to AI and then paying people to kind of fix it later, you know, as it were. And this whole thing of pulling up the drawbridge behind you, putting up the ladder behind you, so you end up with a lot of very experienced professionals in businesses, but there's nobody coming behind them, you know, and junior tasks are just handed over to an AI system. I think that, you know, that's worrying. I think a good use of AI, they were talking about the next generation of people coming through Generation Alpha and so on, and people entering the job market now, is people using AI to find things out in greater depth for themselves. I think that's potentially very exciting, you know, and I think a lot of students are doing that. They're spending time with AI, investigating things in a way that previously they might not have done, you know, or they might just have gone to the library and read, you know, tried to find one book on the subject. Now they can actually engage with lots of different sources of information, query it and play around with it and ask it questions. And I think that, you know, that could be a very positive thing.
Just a reminder to those listening in live, if you do have a question for any of the panel, do feel free to pop one in the Q&A bar.
Excuse me, Richard, can I just pick up on what Chris was talking about there?
Yeah,
because I think that's a really, really crucial point. So one of the skills we should be talking about in school, in education and training, is how to use these tools properly. You know, because we've kind of spoken a bit about how people are finding their way through to use those tools, and perhaps we're not actually using some of the skills that would ensure we're getting the maximum value out of generative AI. So what we actually need to do is teach people how to use these tools properly. Those skills are absolutely crucial, because if we don't upskill people to do that through education and training, we're actually going to divide society into two: those that are capable of taking these these jobs that require more human skills, more creative thinking, more systems thinking, all those kind of things, and those people that come through the education system that might have done the previously more manual tasks. And we would all accept, I'm sure, that the first things that get automated, whether that's mechanical robots or artificial intelligence pieces of software, the first jobs that do go are those where people are less skilled. So, you know, so we need to make sure that what we do is encourage people to actually collect the skills that help them maximize the benefits available through these new technologies.
Yeah, you raised some good points there, Steve, because, sorry, Richard, I was just going to add to that. There are some books now that are actually actively encouraging learners to actually go, you know, read further. So at the end of a book, instead of there just being a summary and the references, for example, there would also be some sections there where you can actually go on and you know, type in some prompts that the book has suggested, and then you can kind of dig deeper into that topic. So it's certainly true that we need to encourage that. The challenges that education institutions face now is raising your head above the parapet as to how much you allow and how much is then genuinely a learner versus the AI. And so that debate is still raging on, although, you know, there are inroads into agreeing that it is a tool that learners should be able to use freely in the right context so that they can learn to use them. So very important. And as has been referred to previously, technologies like Copilot are very important. So that needs to be kind of like the mainstream now of any programming course or coding course, that the learner needs to be able to use Copilot, because those basic programming skills can be enhanced by then focusing on the more complex bits, maybe to understand something which is more detailed, because you actually understand the basics and you've been able to understand that with a pair programming task which uses something like a tool like Copilot.
Thank you very much. You've all anticipated my next question, which is around accessibility to a lot of this technology from a young age. You know, you're almost talking there about a kind of culture. Certainly, Stephen, you know, you talked about being able to not just find your way through it, but it's that access to it, to be skilled at it. It's the language of it. It's us as a society being able to ensure that everybody gets you know what their relationship is, I think, to this technology. So yesterday, as part of the festival, we had the honor of taking over one of these big manufacturing plants that I mentioned earlier in Basildon, which is the New Holland tractor factory. It's the I think it's the largest tractor factory in Europe. It's certainly you know, they are the second largest agriculture company in the world, and it's this factory in Basildon that is absolutely pioneering kind of methane as a clean fuel, and it of the 17,000 tractors they produced last year, only 2 were identical, because the level to which they can now build completely bespoke models using 3D printing and a lot of sort of automated machinery is absolutely extraordinary. But the point was, we brought in 6 schools from across Basildon, you know, 10, 15 kids from each school, who'd never been in the factory before, though, you know, probably are aware that there's a history in their family of people, you know, people went and worked in the factory, you know, for the kind of manual jobs. What we wanted to do was to expose opportunities to play with, be part of a very new kind of relationship with technology. So they had a exclusive behind the scenes tour of the factory, got to look at things. But we also brought in a drone company that came and used some new drone tools that they're doing all around distributing aid in far-flung places. We did some VR painting. We had a coding small kind of mini bots competition, so people could use code to program the route around for this robot. The point being, these kids, honestly, in the kind of 3-4 hours that they were spending going around these sort of different stations, were just saying, I've never come across this stuff before. You know, a lot play computer games, but hadn't made the link between the skills they need to play computer games with operating drones, and that the fire and rescue team in Essex really needs drone operators, and that there's a sort of kind of link between that skill and what they might be able to use there. And it was incredible, just this kind of realizing how big the digital exclusion divide can be. And these kids were those that were curious and opted to come along, you know, were kind of hungry to learn a bit more, and take part in this day. I just realized there's a really long way to go for a lot of this stuff to be normalized. And so I just wondered, you know, again, with all kind of different perspectives there, what's the collaborative role to try and bridge that gap? You know, Rose, you talk about no code opportunities to try and get people involved in stuff early on. You know, Sharon as an educator trying to get learning online, so people don't have to go to a campus necessarily. You know, just wanted a kind of conversation about access to this stuff from really young ages, and how do we do that? What can we do differently to what we're doing at the moment? I don't know who wants to pick that up first.
Yeah, I'm happy to go ahead. I think one way we can look at things is open source access, which I mentioned before. It's something that's being kind of discussed. As I've said, there's issues around just openly allowing access to certain technologies, etc. But I think we could probably agree that normally the amount of good that you can do by allowing open access is more than perhaps the harm of of a few individuals. So that, I think, for me is one of the key things, because once access is far more available, then you can have access to that at, at a young age, if you're curious, on any kind of a device that you own, especially a mobile phone. If you think about other parts of the world where mobile phones are so important for even things like banking, more so than here, then you can see how having access to the technology on a device that everybody has access to could be one really quick way of allowing that access to be available. Because once we're all able to use these systems, then we're able to actually be more creative and then influence how that happens through the culture and the social aspects. Because all the technologies that have kind of, happened since COVID and prior have actually affected and changed us. They've probably even changed the way we think, the way our brains actually work. There are suggestions that, if you don't use some skills, you lose them. And if you develop some skills, you kind of enhance those. So there's a lot there that I think open access to these kinds of technologies can be really useful.
Thank you.
To build on that as well, I think no one, regardless of your age, is going to be able to entrust their career development to an organization anymore. Everyone's going to have a very large amount of agency and continual reinvention. So it means that we're going to all need to be very self-motivated learners. On the one hand, I find that problematic because if you, for instance, have got unpaid care responsibilities, then the amount of free time you've got to invest in self-learning is much, much lower than someone else. So there's a whole equity discussion about that. But in general, this is where we're heading. And the key thing, I think, for young people, it is that exposure, and it's also understanding what their passion is. Because whatever your passion is, whether it's drones or gaming or whatever, there is something that you will be able to build really quickly now. You can go into Claude and ask artifacts to build you a product just by typing in a paragraph, and it will start to appear in front of your eyes. So I think encouraging that creativity but connecting with young people's passion is really, really critical. That's where I would start, and actually regardless of the age.
For me, the difficulty with all these ideas is, you can see your big 17,000 tractors a year manufacturer having the resources, the capacity, and the people to go into schools and promote this stuff. And big companies, I think, should be doing that. It should be part of the deal that they have with society. But I think, the smaller you go with a company, you can kind of do things in an appropriate way that you feel is you being a socially responsible entrepreneur. But with the best will in the world, it's really difficult for very small businesses to actually have that engagement, to get people thinking that in that way. I mean, having said that, one of the things perhaps service businesses might be able to do is to try to get, I don't know, youngsters thinking about the future. So, what might the world look like in 10, 15 years' time? Because the irony is, of course, it's all very well having baby boomers like me thinking about what the world might be like in 15 or 20 years' time. But with the best will in the world, it's probably going to be more applicable to someone that's slightly younger than I am. So I think, we need to do two things here. We need to not only get people thinking about what are the kind of technologies, what are the things that they should be learning now, because in the next few years they're going to go into the workplace. But then what about younger kids? A kid starting school at the moment will probably never need to learn how to drive. So, if you think about that in the context of what kind of experiences should we be giving to very young children now to help them think about the future, they're very different than the experiences we should be giving to 12, 13, 14-year-olds. So somehow we need to kind of work out what it is we need to do and how we need to do it to ensure that we get the right kind of experiences into schools, into places with young people that actually match the point at which they will become a part of the jobs market.
A couple of points I'd like to make. I think we tend to focus on, the government tends to focus on a major problem to overcome being digital exclusion. which is obviously a challenge in creating this sort of new world and having access to these new technologies. But a more interesting measure is digital poverty, and I know the Digital Poverty Alliance is doing a lot of work in this area. That digital poverty is a far more widespread challenge than actual exclusion, and that's people who they might be growing up in a household in which there is a mobile phone, but that mobile phone belongs to maybe one person in the household, perhaps a single mum or single parent who needs it for work and is away from the household quite a lot. And so although there might be a device in the home, that it's not actually accessible to a young person who's at school or is in the education system somehow. And so I think addressing digital poverty is very important. And I think companies have a lot of role to play in that, in terms of opening up technology to the local community. I think perhaps more businesses could do more to recognize that while somebody might have access to a mobile phone or a laptop, they don't necessarily have regular, predictable access to it. And so creating forums in which people can use technology, I think is very important. And I think something that organizations can do as well is also to foster a culture in which people do discuss things more and question things more. And the reason I say that is that I came across an interesting blog the other day from a programmer, a coder, and he was saying that coding is AI use in coding now is now so widespread that it's completely normalized already. That so many people who are programmers now use AI all the time to generate code because they're having to get things done far more quickly. They're having to rush product out far more quickly. But what this guy was saying was that the problem is they don't actually understand code anymore on quite a fundamental level. That they don't know how to code, but they do know how to get AI to do the coding. And he was saying that the way to overcome this is to actually get people together and say, have you explored this other way of solving this problem? Why did you think the AI chose this method rather than that one? You know, to actually discuss things and query things a bit more rather than just accept a solution that's been put forward by an AI. You know, because as we were talking about earlier, Richard, it's this sort of depth of knowledge that risks vanishing from organizations and being replaced by a kind of shallow general knowledge about things. You know, it's very easy to imagine a world in which depth and expertise vanishes and it resides entirely in AI systems, and people simply accept what the AI says and don't question it. So I think fostering a culture in which people do talk about things and say, well, have we tried this other approach? Why did we choose to do it this way rather than that way? And actually trying to engage with issues in a deep way so that that depth of understanding is retained and not just lost when somebody who's been in the job market for years leaves the company. You know?
Yeah, and the conversation about technology does feel extremely binary at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, certainly in the school playground, it's, you know, ban everything or let children do everything all at once because it's the only way they're going to save us all. You know, it just feels that the nuance of balance feels we're not quite there yet. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I do want to. Firstly, actually, to a shout out to Jess Flack and Digital Essex, who do some extraordinary work around digital poverty and exactly some of these things that we've been talking about in terms of access and bridging business to community. But also, just we're very near the end of this year's Creative Tech Fest. In fact, it ends tomorrow, but we do have two more events. One is an AI boot camp for small businesses that we're doing in partnership with AI Potential, sponsored by Holiday Inn. That unsurprisingly was sold out almost immediately. So there is a waiting list on there if people want to look at the website, but you'd be lucky to get a spot. But I am looking forward to that and bringing some of these conversations to that event. But also, as Andy at Southend Tech has put in the chat, there is to kind of close the festival, really, there is a tech meetup, talks and networking for adults tomorrow at Unit 10 in Basildon High Street. With all sorts of different speakers and provocations. So do go along to that from 6:30 if if you've been inspired by anything today and want to go and talk to people in real life about some of this, please do. We've only got 1 minute left, but I would love to invite you all to give me maybe one word or phrase about what you're optimistic about. This is a really tough one, but I'm going to invite you to do it. Something that, amongst all the doom, the gloom, the complexity, actually excites you about the kind of tech future and what it means for the workforce. Rose, you're nodding, so unfortunately, I'm going to come to you first.
I'm going to say founders, because I think there's something about, entrepreneurialism and taking control and exciting new business models. So I'm going to go with that, founders.
Wonderful, thank you. Sharon, you look like you're nodding. That's a sheer sign I'm going to come to you.
Sure, Richard. I think with the systems with real world mental models, my encouragement around that would be in future we can have a far more representative system than some of the kind of limited ones that we have now. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Brilliant, thank you. Steve, I'm spotlighting you.
Abundance, because I think the technological landscape that we have at the moment represents an enormous opportunity for life, society, and business to live in a world where everything we need is abundant.
Thank you very much. And finally, Chris.
Personalized learning. I think the idea of being able to pursue interests independently and to query things in depth is very exciting. And I think, a lot of training and educational organizations now and publishers are working in this area as well to allow, learning to be personalized to the learner. I think that's a very interesting idea.
Well, what a wonderful conversation, very rich and rewarding. We could do this not just all day, but all week. Real privilege to have such great expertise. So thank you so much to Chris and to Steve, to Rose, and to Sharon. We will be releasing this conversation on video. So if you've been a part of it today and think others would benefit, please do share, and we'll make the link available through the Creative Tech Fest website and the newsletter, etc. But otherwise, thank you for those that have attended live. Thank you for those future people that access this via tech yet to come. Yeah, let's all hope that the positive aspects of what we dream about here come to fruition. But thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.